Hey everyone, my name is Olaf, and today I'll teach you how to make this exact animation in Blender. And you will learn how to add wind to large-scale rigid body physics simulations. As always, it's going to be quick and easy, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start off by selecting the light and then press X to delete. Then select the cube, and then let's go into the modifiers and add an array modifier. So add modifier, then array. And then let's set the distance to 1.01. And then I'm going to set the number to 10. Okay, and then copy the modifier. And then let's set the distance to 1.01 for the y-axis. And then copy the modifier once again. And then let's set the set distance to 1.01. And then let's apply all of the modifiers so that we can separate the cubes. So click apply, apply, and apply. And then let's go into edit mode so that we can separate them by loose parts. So press P and then separate by loose parts. And then go back to object mode. The next step is to give each cube an individual origin point. So set the origin point to geometry and then hold in shift and select one of the cubes. Let's go into the physics settings and let's add rigid body physics. And then set the collision margin to 0 because the cubes are so close. And then we need to add the rigid body physics to the rest of the cubes. So go to Object, Rigid Body, and then copy from Active. And after a few seconds, you will have the physics added to the rest of the cubes. And then we're going to duplicate this cube of cubes on the z-axis. So press numpad 1 to go to the front view. And then you need to press Shift D to duplicate, and then set to move the duplication on the z-axis. And then we need to make sure that the cubes are close enough. So let's go to the top and try to set it close, but not too close. So something like this. And then left click to confirm. And then we can repeat the previous actions by pressing Shift R. And then just press Shift R a couple of times, and we get the tower. And the reason why I didn't do this in the array modifier is because it takes way longer to copy the rigid body physics from active when we have more cubes. So I just added 1,000 cubes first, and then just duplicated them on the z-axis instead, which is way faster. Okay, so now we have the tower, so press Alt-A to deselect everything. And then let's go to the bottom of the tower, switch to 3D cursor select, and move the 3D cursor to the bottom of the tower. Okay, and then let's add a plane. And then press S to scale up the plane. And then I'm going to move the plane slightly downwards to give the plane some margin for the cubes. So press G, then set, then minus 0.001. And then we also need to extrude the plane on the z-axis before we add the physics. So let's go into edit mode, press E, then set to extrude on the z-axis. And by adding thickness, there won't be any cubes going through the floor. Okay, so let's add the rigid body physics to the floor. Set the type to passive. Let's use a mesh shape and set the collision margin to 0. Okay, and before we continue, let's save the project. So go to File, Save As, and then give the file a name and save it wherever you want on the computer, and then press Enter to save. Now, the next step of the tutorial is to add the wind to the simulation. So let's go to Add, and then go to Force Field, and then select Wind. Okay, and then press G to grab, and then zoom in, and then press R, Y, then minus 90 to rotate the wind minus 90 degrees on the y-axis, and then press S to scale up the wind. So something like this. And let's start off by animating the wind strength. So let's set it to 0 in the beginning. Let's go to frame 40, for example, and then press I to keyframe the value. And then let's go to frame 60 and set the strength to 500. And then press I to keyframe. And then let's set the flow to 10. I'm not going to go into details on these settings, so if you want to learn more, just go to the Blender wiki and read about the wind physics. Okay, so let's go to the rigid body world settings. And by increasing the steps per second and solver iteration values, we increase the accuracy of the simulation. So let's set it to 550. Then set the end frame to 500. And then the end frame in the animation itself to 500. Now let's save before we bake, and then bake all dynamics. And after maybe an hour of baking, we have the simulation. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. And as you can see, the wind works, and it's slowly moving the cubes to the left. You can also increase the strength of the wind and then bake again to have a even greater impact at the cubes. So let's save before we continue. Save as, click on the plus sign, and then save. And now it's time to set up the camera. So press numpad 0 to look through the camera. Then select the camera and go into the camera settings. And let's increase the range of the camera, as this is a very large simulation. And then press N, and then go to View. And then let's lock the camera to View and go backwards. And once you have a good camera position, we can go to the next step of the tutorial, which is to set up the render settings and the materials. So let's start off by going into rendered view. And then let's go into the render settings and switch to cycles, which is better for large scale simulations. And then let's set the number of samples in the viewport to 120 as well for now. And let's go into the world settings as well and make the background completely white. Then let's select the floor and let's add a material to the floor. I'm just going to use a diffuse shader. Let's set it to diffuse. And let's make it completely white. And then we need to select the cubes. So let's unlock the camera from view. And then go into wireframe mode. And then press Alt A to deselect everything. And then press B to box select. And you can't really box select all of them at the same time because there's so many. So just do some at a time. And then hold in Shift and deselect the floor. And make sure to deselect the wind as well. Okay, so now we need to hold in Shift and select one of the cubes. And then let's add a material to the cube. I'm going to delete the old one and add a diffuse shader. Okay, and then you can add whatever color you want. I'm just going to add a blue color. And then we need to go to Object, make links, and then link the materials to the rest of the cubes. Okay, and then we can go into rendered view. And as you can see, they're all blue. So now press numpad 0 to look through the camera. Lock camera to view. And then I'm going to move the camera a little bit downwards so that we get a different angle. And I think that looks a lot better. So let's go to the next step of the tutorial, which is to go into the render settings. Let's first go into solid view. And then I'm going to use the GPU for the rendering. If you only have a CPU, you can just use the CPU. If you use a GPU, it's often useful to increase the tile size. But if you only use a CPU, 64 is fine. Okay, so let's go to the output settings. And I'm going to set the frame rate to 30 FPS. And then let's select a folder for the final animation. And you can save this animation wherever you want on the computer. But I'm going to give the animation a folder so that we can render out the animation as PNGs. So let's give the folder a name. And then select the folder. And then give the animation a name. And then press enter to save. Okay, so now we have everything set up. So let's save one more time before we start the final render. So let's go to File. And then Save As. And then click on the plus sign to create a new file. And then enter. Okay, so let's do a test render. Go to Render and then Render Image. And that looks fine. But I think I'm going to increase the number of samples. So let's set it to 200 under the render settings to increase the quality of the render. And then go to Render once again and start rendering the animation. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll post more simulation tutorials very soon, as well as a simulation course. So thank you guys for watching, and subscribe.